Hello and welcome to episode 343 of the Crate and Crowbar. It is the 8th of October 2020. My name is Chris Thurston and joining me this evening are Graham Smith.
Hello.
And Tom Senior.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, everybody. News this week, pretty much, is the release into early access of Baldur's Gate 3, which also already appears to be pretty popular with the nerds. I don't know why. I want this. I don't know why I decided to do that.
Nerds.
No, I don't know. Sometimes you just got to pointlessly. I was going to say it's not even punching down from where I am. Sometimes you just got to
punch sideways.
Yourself. Yeah, punch yourself square in the nose. So Larian's Baldur's Gate 3, which we should probably disclaimer briefly with the fact that our friend and former colleague Adam worked on it. Adam Smith. Or is working on it because it's not done yet. Is out now.
I was wondering, the big question I have is whether you guys are going to play it in early access or wait until it's done. This is a dilemma I've been having with this, and I think I'm in a camp of just waiting until it's finished to actually get into it as an RPG.
I think I too am in that camp. I think if it had come out at a different time, I don't think that's just on principle. I think it's also that this has been quite a dense time for games I really want. And I'm trying to balance that as it is, and I almost can't take a high investment RPG right now, and it's almost comforting to know that it's not finished so that I have a good reason not to play it right now.
It's like the best time to play Original Sin 2, their last game, was like 2 years after it first came out, because they did early access with that, but then after release they then did a definitive edition which added a bunch more quality of life changes and that sort of stuff.
They fixed the ending as well, changed a lot of it was a pretty significant overhaul, so that's a kind of, you're right, that's a kind of sign of things to come for Baldur's Gate 3. I don't know anything about what state it's in at the moment, but it's a good show.
Yeah, so I think is that we're all agreed that we're not going to play this.
Good podcasting, everyone.
Sorry, Adam. I have heard really great things. I love the idea of what they've done, and I'm very pleased that Larian were the ones to kind of get to do that, I think, and I am curious about how exactly that came to be. But it's nice to see, I think, because D&D has entered the kind of public consciousness so much more than it was when the original games were a thing. Mostly thanks to live streams and live play tabletop stuff, that it's nice to see a game come out that embraces the kind of tabletop weirdness of that setting rather than what has traditionally been done with the Forgotten Realms, which is a lot more kind of po-faced traditional fantasy. So I'm really excited about that.
Larian is such a good fit for that series. I think if they're going to make a modern version of Baldur's Gate, which is obviously one of the most staid digital interpretations of the D&D rule set, I have confidence that they can do something much more fun with it than being another typical isometric RPG. Yeah,
and I think that sort of simulationist thing they approach, they take, the attitude they take when approaching these games, is one of the reasons that I might end up ducking in. I think my resolve to not play it in early access may not last till it comes out. It might end as soon as I want to play it. Which could be tomorrow, really, by the time this podcast comes out. But I think the thing that maybe preserves that approach for me as viable is that while the story and the kind of linear stuff is super important, the fact that it's more of a sandbox, as more of a simulation using D&D's rules, makes that appealing to me. It's a game I can imagine wanting to just replay and experiment with things and stuff like that, rather than it being a linear experience I want to save until it's perfect.
I think I might just email Adam Smith every Monday at 9 a.m. and ask him repeatedly, should I play this yet? Should I play this yet? Should I play this yet?
Yeah.
Until he blocks me. And that'll
be when you know.
That's right. That'll be the time. That'll be the time to install it.
Good. Well, congratulations to them. And also, the other thing is it appears to have gone down extremely well so far.
Yeah, for sure.
The early signs is that it's done extremely well. So that's a positive sign for this sort of thing. I'm trying to think if there's any other news. This is the Steam Autumn Games Festival thing that I don't really know very much about. It's just the lots of demos festival, right? It's not the sale, or am I wrong about that?
I think it's both at the same time. I think everything on Steam is a sale now.
Yeah.
But also demos are just a thing now. Remember demos?
Yeah.
That now they're sometimes called prologues. If you go to Steam and type in the word prologue into the search bar, you will just find hundreds of demos that are called prologue. But there are like 1,000 demos or something like that for the Autumn Festival. A lot of them are demos that were released during previous time-limited events like the Steam Summer Festival or PAX EGX or Gamescom and that sort of stuff. But a lot of them are new as well.
I'm really interested in Fights in Tight Spaces is one of the sort of tactical games that has a new demo out as part of this effort. So it's definitely worth digging into the archives of this stuff to get those good, sweet demos. But yeah, the demos of prologues. Prologue, what is that? That's strange.
Sorry, go on.
No, go on, Graham.
I was going to say, I've installed just one demo so far, which is called Watch Me Live Stream My Mental Breakdown, which is a tactical card game about being a live streamer where your opponent is your audience, which sounds great.
That's cool.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, that's clever.
Oh, there's some such bad Warhammer games in this. I'm sorry. I'm just
You're
surfing
sorted.
it. Yeah. No, I'm going to have a good week.
Graham. Graham, what have you been playing?
Hello. I've been playing Genshin Impact.
Did I time that for exactly when you were taking a big drink?
Yes. Was that apparent from my that was my Pepsi Max noise.
Huge spit take. What?
Well, that is the response to playing Genshin Impact, which is a free-to-play mobile gacha game, which is not something I expected to be playing. But it turns out it's also a free-to-play Breath of the Wild on PC, which is a strange combination. This is the game. You might have come across it last year because Sony, it's also on PS4, and Sony showed a trailer for it at one of their conferences, and there was a video that went viral afterwards of an outraged Nintendo fan destroying their PlayStation 4 in protest.
Because in protest at what?
That this game was too similar to Breath of the Wild, and Sony were ripping off Nintendo's magnum opus.
They are, though.
Well, to some extent. This is an open world anime RPG. I'm not even going to say JRPG. It's an anime RPG in which you have a glider and you can climb any vertical surface. So it's pretty damn Breath of the Wild. It gets worse as well when you see like the enemy designs, and the enemies live in like little camps made out of wooden fort-like walls and huts and that sort of thing. So it's pretty damn Breath of the Wild. And I understand people being kind of like skeptical of it and critical of it for that reason. I don't want to be, though. I just want to celebrate it because Breath of the Wild was great, and I want people to learn the lessons of Breath of the Wild's open worlds. Yeah. And it's not like there are that many games in which you can climb any surface, not with that kind of stamina bar consideration. Obviously, you can do it in Assassin's Creed, but it doesn't feel the same way as it does in Breath of the Wild and now Genshin Impact. And yeah, if game developers aren't willing to copy from other game developers, then id would have been the only ones to make a first-person shooter. They would have done Doom, and no one would have followed in its footsteps. So, like, I have no problem with people making Breath of the Wild style games and just claiming that that's a genre now. But more importantly, I think they do it really well. Like, I don't think they just copied the surface elements of you can climb things and there's a little hang glider. I think they've actually understood what made that game's open world interesting in terms of it's got a map which doesn't have very many icons on it, which you can actually switch to a mode where it's got no icons on it whatsoever. And the geography of that open world is designed in such a way that it's constantly presenting you with interesting looking things on the horizon that it's then fun to traverse your way towards and discover what that thing is. And reward you with some story, some quests, some XP, or just a beautiful vista. And it's an extremely beautiful game. And like the best moment I've had in it so far was stumbling across a duck pond at night and just like being struck by how beautiful it was, and what a lovely atmosphere it has. Just like you can sit down at certain like benches and stuff like that within the world, and it's got a photo mode. And I've just spent a bunch of time like futzing around with that basically, and had a great time. But the actual like mechanics beyond that are really good as well, and it does have a bunch of differences from Breath of the Wild. Most notably is the combat. So you're not controlling a single protagonist. You control one person at a time out of a party of 4, and you can hot swap between those 4 characters at any moment. And you can, I think there's like 23 characters altogether you can unlock via the gacha mechanics, which I'll get onto, to join your party. And each of those characters has an elemental ability. So you start off with a character who is has wind powers. And so she's got a sword. She can hit things with her sword. She can also create tornadoes to blow enemies away. And a couple of other magic abilities that set on cooldowns. You then get a character called Amber. She has a bow and arrow, which you can charge up to fire arrows. You then get an ice guy, and then an electro woman,
and then lava man, and then
and so on and so on. And then you have these enemies who have particular immunities or vulnerabilities to those abilities. And so like they kind of, I can't remember what the little goblin characters, but they're basically the same as the moblins from Breath of the Wild, but some of them will be carrying a wooden shield, and so you can switch to Amber and fire a fire arrow at the shield catches fire and gets destroyed. You can then switch to one of your melee characters by just pressing a button on the D-pad to do it instantly in the midst of combat and start bashing them without them being able to defend themselves.
God, that sounds great.
And there are then there's lots of slimes, like Dragon Quest style slimes, where they're a water slime, and so they're particularly susceptible to fire, which causes them to start to evaporate, but immune to some other abilities. And technically, you sort of feel like water should be immune to fire, because you can't set water on fire. But never mind.
Yeah, I thought you were about to say, like, this is the ice guy's time to shine, but nope. It's Firewoman again. Like,
Well, maybe that was an incorrect example, but you get the idea. Certainly the water guys are more susceptible to the electro attacks, because you can use your ice guy who can make characters wet, and then switch from having made them wet to your electro lady, who's called Lisa, which is weird because that's my partner's name, and then start hitting them with electric bolts, which do more damage because you've made them wet previously. Which is that's a really simple, common combat thing. That's BioShock basically, getting a big daddy in a puddle and then hitting them with an electric wrench or whatever.
But guys, I love video games. May they never change.
Can you imagine if at any point real fighting ever worked like that? Like, you have to like throw a glass of water at someone and then
electrocute them with a plug socket or something.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds great though, Graham. Sorry, I completely interrupted you there, but
no, it is great. What were you going to say?
I was going to actually ask you to what extent it's an MMO, and like whether to what extent you can actually play with other people, how that manifests.
So within the world, because it's Breath of the Wild, within the world there are dungeons, and you can go in there and fight enemies and do different quests within those dungeons, and you can do those dungeons cooperatively with other players. I haven't done any of that stuff yet, and as far as I can tell, like it's sort of like that's the kind of end game stuff. Like you can do it earlier on in the game, but it's primarily, it seems to be designed as a single player RPG that then you can, because that's the other thing of it being kind of like having these underpinning JRPG mechanics where you've got a party. Everything has a stat attached to it. and then you can level up every one of those stats. And it's in this where you can start to see where some of the free-to-play hooks and some of the kind of like games as service stuff start to come in, where it looks like already my characters have a health bar which goes up into the tens of thousands, and I've only played the game for like 10 hours. It seems like those health bars and the amount of damage you're going to be putting out is going to go up to, you know, tens or hundreds of thousands, and then you're going to be going into dungeons to fight against enemies that are similarly leveled and wanting to partner with friends who have maybe complementary characters to bring with them to you and that sort of stuff. That's sort of compelling to me, but not nearly as much as the single player It's a Breath of the Wild stuff. And like, I keep referring to these characters, and I mentioned there's 23 of them. You get 4 within the first, I don't know, like 4 or 5 hours of the game, and that's as many as you can have in a party. They each have a different elemental ability, and in the 10 to 12 hours I've played so far, I haven't seen any need to have any kind of other character in order to, like, it's not giving me difficulty walls or big grindy gaps that I need to go through. That would feel like it was trying to compel me to pay money, because the gacha mechanics, if people aren't familiar, gacha is like basically gambling in order to unlock characters, and like in this, I think it's you get some like free rolls to try and get some characters early on, and then you're paying for like premium currency to essentially gamble for like a 0.6% chance of getting a character you want, which sounds like garbage, but again, I've played it for 10 to 12 hours at this point. And it's not just that I don't feel pressured into doing those things by the game's mechanics. The game hasn't mentioned at any point that those systems exist, and I don't know how to do them. Like, the game hasn't taught me how to access the gacha stuff and get characters and things. And like, to the point where I know that I have, as a new player, some free rolls that might get me another character, but I don't know where to go to use them. And like, that's pretty generous as far as free-to-play games go. And like, I've played for 10 to 12 hours at this point, and it was completely free. If I never had another second of fun with this game from this point onwards, I would still be extremely satisfied, because I've just had a lovely experience with it up to this point. And it looks, for all the world, like I'll be able to play it for probably at least another 10 more. Based on like the number of quests that I've already discovered that are accessible to me at my current level and that sort of stuff. And it's like, when we cover a lot of free games on RPS, we make a lot of like articles about it and videos about it, and we're always trying to recommend people go download, you know, really arty indie games, you know, Murder Dog 4 and that sort of stuff. And most of the time that's not what people are looking for. What people are looking for is the secret free AAA game that they didn't know existed. You know, they're looking for the Call of Duty that they didn't know was out there, right, but also it's free. You know, and so like, something like Fortnite sort of fits the bill, because it's like, well, that's as good and as polished as a paid-for AAA game. Yeah. But the problem with Fortnite is that everybody's already heard of it, everybody's already got it. Genshin Impact is actually, feels like that thing that everyone's always looking for. This is a polished AAA game that's free that you haven't yet heard of, because I'm having as much fun with it at this point as I was having with Breath of the Wild. 10 hours into Breath of the Wild.
So I'm definitely going to get this downloaded. But I've got to ask, why is it called Genshin Impact?
I don't fully know. So like, it's by a Chinese game developer called MiHoYo, and it's clearly inspired by Japanese games, Japanese anime, and it's sort of part of a series. I think it's the 4th game in a series, where the previous game was called Honkai Impact. Awesome. And so I guess like Impact is the brand, but like there's nothing like, I don't think the region of the world that you're in the game is called Genshin or anything like that, and I'm not aware of what links, if any, it has to the previous game in the series or anything like that. So yeah, I don't know is the answer to the question.
Yeah, that's mostly a question designed to just say Genshin Impact again, so that everyone knows what we're talking about and can download it. It sounds flipping great. That sounds awesome.
What have you guys been playing?
Well then. So last week, you will recall, if you listened to the podcast last week, that Tom and I both were very, very excited at that time the imminent release of Star Wars Squadrons, and I will say, and this is to lead with good news, I'm now impatient to get through the podcast so I can play Star Wars Squadrons, which is exactly where I was this time a week ago.
Yeah,
but it's good that I'm still there. So I've played about 30 hours of this now in a week. Which is a good sign, and I love it very much. And I've got some some critiques and concerns, but overall I'm really, really happy with it. Tom, what is your take on the Star Wars space game?
This is exactly the game I wanted at exactly the right moment, which is separate from the actual qualities of the game. It's a very well made game. It's very great. It's a really fun space dogfighting game, which has great aesthetic art direction. Anyway, and yeah, so I've gone through some stuff in the last few days, and not to get to like describe it in any detail. The relief of coming back to my PS4 and being able to pilot an X-wing has been incredible. It's been such a relief and really, really fun to just pop TIE fighters like bubble wrap with your beautiful laser cannons. I think I've only played about 10 hours at the moment, but my only criticism so far is there isn't a button you can press to set X-wing foils to attack precision, which for me is just it should be in there. You've got to put it in it.
I want to caveat everything I've got to say about the game by saying that I do know some of the developers, and particularly people who wrote it, and I've played online with them because they're friends and they've been friends for years since my Dota days, and this is my main complaint as well. Like, there are some tech issues that we could talk about. There are some other things. My chief complaint is that there isn't a button that you can press to open and close the S foils on the X-wing or the U-wing, which also has them. I don't know. I mean, I guess we could spin this off into talking about it as a game, because I think it is, this is not small praise. I think it is the most successful interpretation of Star Wars kind of cinematic space dogfighting into a video game that there is, or that there has been. And the reason I say that is because, and I say that with like appropriate reverence for X-Wing and TIE Fighter and X-Wing Alliance and X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, which all I think did an amazing job. But I think they did an amazing job within the context of the time. I think those games hold up to a degree, but I think in some cases they're a bit they're sort of revisited now. I think they've lost some of the drama and spectacle that they had at the time, which is obviously inevitable with the passage of time and improving technology, but also because I think they relied, given what they were, on your imaginative investment, what you were bringing to them, and they were married to a set of systems that are pretty deep and pretty complicated, but unevenly matched to the fantasy of being a Star Wars pilot specifically. Because being a Star Wars pilot is not the same as being any other kind of space dogfighter. There are obviously similar things like Wing Commander, but it's not elite, right? You don't want zero-G physics really in Star Wars, because Star Wars spaceships are planes. They're planes. And all of this stuff. And I think the thing that makes Squadron so successful is they have obviously looked really, really critically at Star Wars as a whole, at the movies, at what's been done on the TV shows and other games and things, and made like a series of decisions about how to build a interesting, internally balanced dogfighting combat game that makes sense of things that are extremely Star Warsy, like angling shields front and back, rebalancing power levels, that kind of thing. But implements every one of them just enough to add meaningful depth to the flight model and to provide you with constantly interesting things to do, but always with a view, I think, to furnishing like an ultimately pretty cinematic feeling game. And that's a really hard balance to strike, I think. And I think that, coupled with really great presentation and sound and everything else, is what makes it all come together. Because I think, I don't want to sound like, I imagine some people will think it's kind of churlish of me to say like this is better than X-Wing Alliance, say, because it's almost as sophisticated and it looks nicer. But honestly, for me at least, what I always wanted from those games is to be immersed in that particular fantasy, knowing that if I wanted a serious flight sim, there are other places I can go. I think they also happen to be some of the best space flight games ever made, but in this case, it's very much like this completes that circuit. And when it all comes together and it all works, it's just one of the best Star Wars experiences I've ever had, I think. And I say that as someone who basically lives in that universe imaginatively half the time.
I think they've struck such a sweet spot with it being a very accessible sim and one that translates very well onto a control pad and onto flight sticks and stuff like that. And the kind of not busy work, but the tactics of changing your power ratios to put power into shields or into your lasers, etc. The fact you could just do that on the D-pad with a little tap, and the fact that it says to you, if you want to actually become more mobile and turn faster, just go to exactly half speed. And that's a game in and of itself. Like you're just trying to get to the sweet spot for the speed for what you need to actually do in the game. And they could have made an arcade game that was incredibly simple, but they've done more than that. They've got the extra mile, and the ships feel so different and so interesting. And I think they've excelled. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, there's so many really interesting decisions. I think you've indicated one of them. Like, one of the classic space dogfighting game issues is the kind of endlessly circling each other problem. And one of the ways that they've finished that, or the standing still and being a turret issue. And one of the ways that they fix that, as you say, is to make your sweet spot, your throttle sweet spot for maneuverability, the middle of the throttle rather than the top or the bottom. So you're not most maneuverable when you're going fast, and you're not most maneuverable when you're slowing down. You're most maneuverable when you're going at an average speed, and that naturally keeps things moving. And then there's loads of cool stuff like the power balancing system. It does let you change the setting so that you can do granular power shunting if you want, or you can have it swing between extremes and then balanced, basically. And both are viable. And that's tied to a really interesting thing, which is being fully charged in any either shields, engines, or weapons gives you slowly overcharges that system, which provides a buff that does different things for different systems. But that buff will slowly decay when you withdraw power from that system, but won't vanish completely. And that again is super clever, because it means that when you're flying to a fight, you're prepping your systems for the thing you're about to do. And there are reasons to be moving in and out of those kind of extremes, rather than like doing the thing that I think anyone who's learning X-Wing Alliance would do, which is like, I'm just going to keep them balanced because I don't trust myself to like live in one of these, with full engines or full shields or something like that. And I just think it's super clever. So you'll find yourself like, so for example, if you have full engines, you'll charge a boost bar. So now that when I'm flying into a battle, I'll charge engines until I'm on the way. I'll start to boost and then shift everything to shields to quickly charge an overshield if I'm on a shielded ship, and then switch back to engines to load boost to top up the boost bar. And then when you're in the thick of it, as soon as you got a firing solution, the skill comes from redirecting all your power to the weapons at just the right time to get what the instant damage bonus you get for doing that.
That's a good
and
one.
Then that's what feels really good. That's the kind of and then pulling off that dance of inputs is the game. And obviously everything else you pile on top of that, from ship types, visibility, tactics, game state, all the rest of it, all of that is what modifies your ability to execute this really satisfying core kind of vehicular combat loop.
I think the single player is a really good tutorial, basically. Like it sort of walks you through all of these options and all of these things that you can do to your ship. And very early on, you have to break a blockade made of Star Destroyers, pretty threatening. And they teach you to go to maximum speed just to outrun the turrets, basically. And that's basically saying, okay, you're up against a certain capital ship, and it's basically shields or speed, and that's what you need to do. And that carries through to the rest of the game modes. And it's really elegant bit of tutorial work there.
Yeah. It's interesting because that tutorial work continues all the way through the campaign. And I think one thing that's kind of nice about it is quite a nice balance. The campaign took me about 8 hours to finish. And then I'm midway through a second playthrough on a higher difficulty setting now. And I thought one thing they did quite well is it does.
Sorry, that's my girlfriend sneezing.
The passing TIE fighter explodes. Sorry. That was incredible.
She says sorry.
That's great. I think the thing, because normally because it is, I think, a multiplayer first game to some extent, but I was kind of expecting a single player story, as multiplayer games often have, set that was exclusively set within multiplayer maps and that focused primarily on effectively like a series of bot matches, basically, to get you up to speed with the story hanging off it. And that's kind of true in some cases. Obviously, some environments do repeat, but actually it's also not, because there's like lots of new environments, and there are particularly a whole bunch of set pieces in multiplayer that like have you played the finished single player, Tom?
I'm about halfway through it, I think, but
Okay.
I've certainly enjoyed the sort of space-borne superstructures that you get to fly through as part of that.
Yeah, they do. They give you some real Star Wars moments that you don't get in multiplayer, in terms of like flying out of an exploding thing, that kind of stuff. And that's really nice to have alongside this kind of campaign, which is otherwise teaching you stuff, so that when you do fight a capital ship in that campaign, the same way, the mechanics for taking it apart and dealing with its subsystems and exposing weak points and blowing them up is the same as the ones you would then later kind of engage with in multiplayer. So like I'm really impressed with it, and I'm impressed with it in the way that I have been impressed with things like MechWarrior games. That's the bracket I would put it in. It is an accomplished vehicle combat multiplayer game first, really, and it happens also to be a Star Wars game. And then the kind of icing on the cake for me is it takes advantage of the fact that it's a Star Wars game to such a kind of huge degree, both in terms of it being obviously a setting that people love, but also in terms of like the ships feeling meaningfully different between the factions, kind of based on their designs, like designs that weren't designed for game balance, but like, they have done a really good job of creating Imperial ships that feel like Imperial ships and Rebel ships that feel like Rebel ships. So I'm trying to get what I'm getting at here. It's really hard to kind of balance those things because they were designed for a particular cinematic effect, right? So TIE cockpits don't make a ton of sense, right? These like little eyeballs facing forward, but they've made that kind of work. Like Imperial ships are pretty maneuverable, but you have this limited visibility, at least in terms of your kind of your periphery. But what you do have is maneuverability and the ability to kind of, because you have shields, the ability to quickly shunt power between engines and guns. In a Rebel ship, you have other systems to deal with. You're also trying to manage your shields, which are both an advantage, but also an extra thing to deal with. But you have these cockpits that are a lot more open in terms of being able to see to your left and right and above you. But also, crucially, you can very rarely see below you, which TIE pilots can, because the nose of your ship is in the way. And that stuff for me is so cool, because that's what makes it feel, and this is going to sound stupid, real. Because it makes you start thinking about the vehicles, both in terms of how they've been balanced as game pieces, but also as like physical machines that you're considering the strengths and the pros and cons of each one based on some things that are pretty tangible about how they're built. And the thing I would say is I've played almost all of my 28 hours with the game have been in VR, which has broken my mind. I've had a lot of really weird dreams this week. And I would say, so the caveat I would put on this is that it has had some real technical wobbles. There's some issues with hotastics. They were fixed today, I think, in a patch. And it took me, my first half an hour with it was a little bit cagey. And I realized that I needed to do two things. I needed to step away and spend half an hour tinkering with graphic settings, updating drivers, looking through, it's got really deep options menus, but just going through those settings and configuring everything and getting the VR working properly. And also accepting that it was going to take me a bit of time to just get used to its flight model. I play with an Xbox pad in VR, and just to learn the controls and learn to get fluent with them takes some time. It doesn't let you in straight away. And when all that came together, I still have had some issues with spotty performance, particularly in the bigger modes. But I've been playing a lot of Dogfight, which is the 5-on-5 deathmatch kind of mode, which is great. And I've been playing a lot of that in VR with friends who are also playing in VR, and it's genuinely it's just exactly what I wanted it to be, because I find myself like talking to my friends about like, they're flying in, they'll say like, okay, they've got an interceptor coming down this angle, and I'm naturally turning my head to look out the windows of my A-wing cockpit to find them. And then like I'm literally picking up my visual scanning, which is something that I've wanted to say to someone else since watching A New Hope. Like it's just that feeling of being in that machine. And the other side of it is those ships feel massive in VR. Like you're so surrounded by them, and all the instrumentation, because most of the UI is in the ship's own instruments rather than in the broader game. There's this incredible sense of like using those, even playing with an Xbox pad rather than a full like HOTAS setup or anything. The feeling of like using those, learning to use those vehicles effectively to pull things off in them is just amazing. And like yesterday, I was playing on a deathmatch game, and I basically found myself being chased by the other team I was in an X-Wing, and I was being chased for about 2.5 minutes, which feels like a long time, like without getting killed, just getting hunted and like weaving around the space station and ducking down into trenchways. And like there's it's one kind of concession to gravity. Zero G is the boost mechanic and the drift mechanic, which allows you to boost and then basically do a cool handbrake turn. But it's the thing that Poe does in the start of The Last Jedi, where you can kind of like skid, and it feels amazing, and it feels fucking incredible in VR when you're sort of weaving thing around corners and things, and the rest of it. It's really, really, really good, and I just want to keep playing it. And like it's the kind of single player game where like I don't think it's like revolutionary single player in any way, but it's got a solid story and a likable cast and cool moments where, particularly in VR, you can just stand in a room and a Star Wars character will talk at you directly to your face. And in VR, that's really weird because you can step forward and give Wedge Antilles a little kiss.
Just sort of stroke their face. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Mwah. And all the rest of it. Sorry, go on, Tom.
So Chris, what is your favourite ship, and why isn't it the A-Wing?
So, that's a big question.
I know.
So this is the thing. So it's got the other thing. So it's got a loadout system, which allows you to customize the ships. And in single player, it quickly kind of gives you all of these. In multiplayer, you have to unlock stuff, but it's very generous with those unlocks. You can quickly build almost anything you want, particularly if you know what you're building. I have built a ton of ships, and it's very hard to pick a favorite. In terms of being there, I love being inside the U-Wing, the transport ship, because in VR, it's massive on the inside, and you can turn around and just look inside the entire crew bay where people would sit. Sometimes when I've been stressed this week, I've just loaded the game up in VR and sat, because you can just climb into the ship when it's just in the hangar and just sit in the hangar in the cockpit of a ship. Like, this is where I live now. I'll take my meetings in here, please. I do love the A-Wing. The A-Wing has amazing cockpit visibility, and it's very nippy, and it's very little.
Good rapid fire lasers of those.
It does have good rapid fire lasers, and also, so I played a lot of the X-Wing tabletop game for a long time, and it's possible to. They were inspired by quite a lot of X-Wing tabletop upgrades in designing the loadout system for this, and it's possible to recreate some things that work in this as well, which is rad, and that includes basically putting dumbfire rockets on an A-Wing. So rather than the homing missiles and things, they just fire straight forward. And that was really good in the early days of multiplayer, because when players were still learning the game, they would often fly directly at you. There's a lot of jousting, which is what that's called, when you just lock on the other person and just fly directly at them, and then chase people in a straight line. And so my favorite trick early on was to let someone chase me in a straight line in an A-Wing, put all the power into the engines, boost, do a 180, flip the ship around with the drift, and then stop with them flying directly towards you and just fire dumbfire missiles in a straight line, and so that they hit a cloud of missiles coming the other way. That feels fucking rad. That feels rad as hell. I tried an extremely dumb build the other day where I put a tractor beam on a U-Wing and then equipped the thing that allows you to make little turrets, and just created a little nest of turrets, and then people would fly past and I would stop them and then like sort of guide them into the hell zone. That's the fun police arriving and stopping that. I like the normal TIE fighter a lot, actually, and the TIE bomber and the Y-Wing and the X. No, it's like I've really enjoyed making different builds for each of the ships for different purposes as well. There's so much to that is really rewarding when you start to dig into it. What's your favorite, Tom?
I do love the A-Wing just because of the expansive canopy and the ability to see a lot of space. And I like space. I like looking at it. And also I like seeing where the TIE fighters are that are trying to come and kill me. And the kind of, that sort of the power balance of putting your energy into lasers, but only having about 5 to 10 seconds of actual burst fire before they run out of gas. Actually, not really forces you to. It's like a shotgun, basically. You have to get quite close. But once you actually get to the right position, you just delete stuff. And that's super, super. That feels amazing. It feels so good. Yeah, so that's my choice at the moment. But I've not actually piloted the U-Wing yet. And they're super cool ships.
They are cool. And like, I think the thing that's really neat about it. So I think what's interesting is all of that stuff kind of becomes super relevant in multiplayer specifically. It's in single player when you go for particular medals and things, but in multiplayer, and multiplayer is divided into two modes. One is just first to 30 kills deathmatch, but that is more complicated than it sounds because there's a lot of different ship builds and you have to pay attention to what your opponent's running and be willing to switch ships and try things. So for example, we were getting absolutely owned by a squadron of all TIE interceptors that were flying together pretty consistently in a cloud and just mobbing people. They're super nimble. That's the Imperial equivalent of an A-Wing.
Right.
And we ended up fixing it, and I came back out in a build that I don't normally use for this purpose, but it's a Y-Wing with these things called Goliath missiles, which are missiles that home very aggressively. And then when they explode, even if they are ultimately caught by countermeasures or something, they explode with a big explosion, which has a big AoE effect. And then this attachment that puts a kind of auto-targeting ion turret on the top of the ship, which can deactivate enemy ships. And all I was doing to help my friends out, my team out, was flying into this squadron of TIE interceptors, sending the missile out so they'd have to deal with it, and then flying through at the ion turret just to force them to scatter. And my job for that game wasn't to get tons of kills, even if it's just deathmatch. It was to force the enemy formation to break, fly away so I don't die, and then call out if anyone's chasing me so they can be dealt with, and then come back and do it again. And that kind of strategy is a lot deeper than I've gotten from like a game like this in a long time. And then the other mode, which is really its kind of showcase mode and its ranked mode, is called Fleet Battle, which is somewhere between a mech warrior game in terms of being like a detailed vehicle combat game and a MOBA, in that it is capital ships. Each side has either a Star Destroyer or a Mon Calamari cruiser. And in addition to that, you have two, is effectively your Ancient, if this was Dota. And then you have two flagships, like two cruisers that kind of sit sort of beside each other. And as the map goes on, the two sides will get closer together. But broadly speaking, the line between each faction's opposed kind of cruisers demarcate lanes. And it depends a little bit on the map how rigidly drawn that is. And then you have, essentially waves of minions, squadrons of NPC-controlled X-Wings and TIE fighters, and occasionally corvettes or Imperial raiders, so smaller capital ships that will fly towards the enemy team and try and break through. And the way it works is it's a tug of war where killing enemy players and killing their ships earns your team morale, but it's like a tug of war bar at the top of the screen. If one team manages to push the morale bar all the way to the far end, they become the attackers and get to make a run on first the enemy cruisers and then the enemy capital ship. And that's basically all there is to it, but that supports a whole bunch of stuff. And at any time you can fly back into the hangar on your capital ship and come back out in a different ship. And it just allows so many really cool moments, from like trusting that your friends have got the dogfight bit sorted, so flying back and changing into a bomber, or all of you changing into bombers and suddenly re-emerging as a bombing squadron.
That's awesome.
Feels fucking great. But I think that would be my segue. So how much multiplayer have you played now, Tom? Or has it all been single player?
It's all been single player for me. I'm quite often quite nervous about multiplayer stuff, but I'm definitely going to get into it once I know how the ships work and how all the controls work and that kind of stuff.
The other really good thing about it is it has really robust play against AI options. And in fact, you're not even allowed to play fleet battles against people until you're level 5, I think. And right. So it tells you, like, play this against AI, like co-op online with other people, but play against bots for like a couple of hours. Yeah.
And I think the AI in even the single player, in terms of you're flying as a squad, squadron, well, of course. But they do kind of, when you eye on a TIE fighter, one of the others will swoop past and finish them off.
Yeah.
And that's a great feeling. Like, just the fact that AI does that, but it's also teaching you how you should probably play in multiplayer.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm already getting a sort of semi-multiplayer experience from the single player aspect of it, for sure.
They made a really interesting decision in the single player, which is your AI teammates aren't there to set you up for success. They actually will win the battle for you. Like, not on their own, but like, if you just about help, they will do a lot of the work, which is kind of interesting. It feels very different. And that actually brings me to one of the things I was going to talk about in terms of concerns. So like the overriding concern is there are some tech issues. There are definitely some rough edges. Occasionally it just won't load ships into the game until I've failed to load a multiplayer game once. And then it will go like, I couldn't load this. Try again. And the second time it will remember what an X-Wing looks like. So that stuff ain't great. But it's not been such sufficiently distracting to ruin the game for me. The other side of it, which I think is kind of interesting, is I think it's a bit of an acquired taste because it's so. Like, this is what there's going to be maybe the broader thing to talk about. It's such a weird game for EA to have made. It's so out of character for any big publisher, but specifically them. And one of the reasons for that, there are many reasons for that, but one of them is that it's an acquired taste, and you're probably bad at it when you start playing. And like so much AAA design is based on the notion that the tutorial is going to make you feel like the biggest badass in the world. And then you will, usually actually by the end of like a typical AAA game, usually by the end of it, it's harder than it was when you started, right? When we were kids and we were playing games like X-Wing Alliance or X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, you were used to the idea that games started out hard and got a bit easier as you got better at them. And that's not been the case for a really long time. But this game is like that. So you start and you'll probably die a bunch and you'll screw up the tutorial and you won't be able to fly in a straight line and you'll be confused by the power systems and you won't get it. And it does teach you, but you have to learn. And one thing I found is that in multiplayer, the matchmaking does what it can, but occasionally, like, you can look at the levels of the people on each team, which just reflects how much time they spent, really. And whichever levels are higher are going to win. They're just going to win. Because if you're new, you probably, and this is a thing, if you're new, you don't contribute very much because you don't have the experience yet, really, unless you're a natural. And I don't think that's necessarily possible with any game that has a lot of its own kind of custom systems. Maybe you play tons of flight stuff.
Is that down to like stat bonuses, or is that purely just the experience of
just experience? That's what I mean. Like your stat bonuses don't attribute anything. What I mean is literally you have to learn how to drive the space car. Mm-hmm. And when you're starting out, you're not as good at it. And that's actually in its favor, right? Like it's meaningfully deep.
Yeah, it's better than the Battlefront 2 card system that just like makes you go faster and shoot better. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, it's doing this thing where like, and I don't think that's a bad thing in terms of a purist sense. But I think what it is potentially kind of off-putting because it means that you dive into the game and you probably suck at first, and not everyone wants to feel like they're bad at something. And I'm still learning, and I love Star Wars, and I would love to be the best space pilot. But I had to kind of make my peace with the fact that like I'm pretty mediocre, and if I work hard, I maybe will become quite good. Maybe. The other side of it is, so that's one thing. Just takes time to get good at. The other side of it is particularly in both multiplayer modes, but particularly in fleet battles, it's not like a MOBA in terms of having tons of stuff to memorize. It is like a MOBA in terms of it's very bad to die. And you have to be aware of the broader state of the map in order to be able to know what to do. And that's something that's very familiar to MOBA players, but other kinds of multiplayer players, particularly deathmatch or like shooter players, aren't used to, which is, in this game, it's sometimes good to do nothing for a little bit, right? Like if you might have just gotten the opportunity to do a run on a Star Destroyer, it doesn't mean you should. Maybe it means you should wait for your team. Maybe it means you should wait for the AI to catch up, whatever it is. Or if you die at the wrong time, you can really fuck things up for your team because you'll be waiting to respawn and, they'll be stuck with not being able to bring the full power to bear. And what that means is it's super satisfying when everyone works together and it goes brilliantly. But otherwise, new players or people who aren't, like interested in playing that way can actively hinder. And I, obviously, being me, like I love games that are designed this way because I think they provide tons of scope for meaningful cooperation and meaningful moments competitively The downside is I also understand that they're not the kinds of things that keep a community growing or keep a community around. And I think I'm really interested in what happens with this game, because
I was going to ask that. Like, I don't know if they've said anything about how they might expand it. And EA are actually very good at expansions. And
well, no,
keeping it.
They have said something today. They've said they won't at all. Yeah. Yeah, they said they have no plans for any form of post-launch support.
That's kind of a shame, I think.
Right? Well, here's the thing, because this is this bizarre old school thing. Like their statement was, I was funny watching people twist themselves into knots about this in the comments, because it's like, that is one of those statements where what they said was like, hey, we scoped this game to be exactly what it is. We've released exactly what we intended to release.
Yeah.
It costs 35 quid, $40. It's self-contained. You buy it, you have everything there will ever be. It's done. And that is kind of what, I mean, they'll still, patch problems and things, but like they've said they won't do anything else. And like, that is part of me is like, that's what people have been asking for now, what feels like a decade.
Yeah.
Why can't we have just games, Pat, where I don't have to buy anything else? I don't have to grind, all the rest of it. On the other hand, I'm like fucking on my knees. Like, I would be the biggest whale for this game. Please, please sell me shit. I will, I'll do anything. Because I would like it to survive. And the other side of it is audiences move on. And, speaking of Genshin Impact, gacha mechanics, collecting mechanics, all of that stuff keeps people around. And it keeps people in the system. And as long as there are people in the system, there are people to play with. And my big worry is that it will remain a preserve for the hardcore, both by virtue of the fact that there won't be people coming in if it doesn't get lots of attention after release, but also because it is only as inclusive as the least experienced player, because the experience the skill curve is quite what it is.
This is in this moment revealed me to be an enormous hypocrite. In that, I'm certainly one of those people who just greatly values the fact that this game is self-contained and that you can actually get as much fun as you want out of it without having to do extra stuff. But at the same time, I think I've played Destiny for so long that I'm kind of expecting the next season of a thing to arrive. Right. And I'm kind of trained for that, and I'm kind of excited about that idea. And so I'm kind of torn about this.
I'm really glad to get your surprise in real time. I saw that a couple of hours before recording this, and I've definitely been dealing with it, where it's like, that is so honorable, you bastards.
Right,
why have you done this?
Why have you done the right thing, you twats?
Yeah, let me pay for a season pass so I can have a B-wing. That sort of thing. Like, one thing I hope is, I think it's good enough. I really genuinely think it's good enough that it could actually, what I fear is the Titanfall, the tribes, things I love that are doomed because they're too technical, basically. The whole theory that even the fact that the decision they made that this is a space game but you're locked in first person because that's how they wanted to balance it. That stuff that puts people off. Making something willingly for a niche audience and then not trying to nickel and dime them, all of that stuff. My worry is if that audience drifts away, then game dies, no one to replace them. My hope is that it's good enough, maybe, just maybe, this 1 in a million shot, where it's good enough to create a new audience of people who love space flight games. Right?
That'd be nice. And
then it grows to the point where it obviously needs and deserves support. I want it to be a surprise hit. That's what I would love it to be, where it people are no, people are playing this a ton. There's tons of people on the subreddit for it. I really hope that's a good sign. But it feels very fragile. And so I've been playing it every day. I did things I don't normally do. I left a Steam review for it because I would feel bad not to give it the best chance at success. Because it would make me sad if it was just sort of sent out to be what it'll be. And then, or to be one of these stories where it's a surprise success. So in 4 years we get a sequel, you know what I mean? I don't know.
Is there any indication of, obviously it's very hard to tell about the sales numbers and stuff like that, but commercially, whether it's been a success, EA obviously very much cares about that, sensibly.
I don't know for sure. So it's got about 10,000 reviews on Steam, mostly positive. So that's
Pretty good.
very respectable. And I think there's tens of thousands of people on the subreddit, and it does seem to have very positive buzz. It had a bit of a rocky start because of the technical issues. Both, so there were two things. There was technical issues and like server issues and things, which obviously are going to be off-putting for people. And particularly there were some issues with HOTAS sticks that were fixed now. The other side of it is it's a very inclusive game, and it has a gender diverse and ethnically diverse cast. And as such, it got really horribly review bombed on Metacritic.
Oh, what?
Yeah, because of balance, basically, complete balance. And so that I think was a rocky beginning. But I really I don't know. See, I feel like in a way that I don't normally do on this podcast, I've just come out and spent like 20 minutes just like firing this fucking stream of like praise for this thing. But part of that's because I just see it as this weird, potentially one-off, and I'm almost already ready for our end of the year podcast where I'm like, this is probably my game of the year. Shame it's already dead. Like, you know what I mean? I just don't want that to be the case, but maybe it will be.
Oof. That's a tragic end to this discussion.
Let's talk about I don't know if there's a way of landing this on something that is more pleasant than that. How do you like them hangers, Tom? They're very echoey.
Very big fan of hangers. Very big fan of people standing very still talking at me in hangers, which is a big part of Squadrons. Actually, can I talk about my fight stick?
Please, please do.
There's no need for a segue when you say a sentence like that. I love it, and it's made me worse at games. I think this is a consequence of. I think when I get a flight stick, which I will eventually do once I've bribed someone on the black market to sell me a HOTAS, the same will happen in Squadrons. But it turns out like control pads are really convenient. That they've been quite well designed to let you execute moves and stuff with the barest minimum of like thumb and finger movement. Suddenly when you're using your entire kind of arm and elbow and you're smacking buttons on a big, very satisfying fight stick, things just seem unnatural, but more fun. So my report from last week is that I would recommend getting one of these, but expect to be worse at the games that you love as a result, temporarily.
Right.
And I'm sure that at some point I'll get to know the buttons and sort of it'll become instinctive. But yeah, so I wanted to report back on that based on last week's podcast.
I'm definitely interested to see what you make of playing Squadrons with a flight stick. I'm pretty tempted, although in VR that is a complicated thing to remember where the fuck it is.
Yeah. I've entered 5 separate eBay bids for the same flight stick, and I was like, okay, I'm willing to pay 100 quid for this. That's like what I want to do. But at the sort of in the last sort of 20 minutes of each bid, someone was like, £200. I was like, what? It retails for £70, just because they're not in stock. So there's a kind of there's a shortage of flight sticks. I think Thrustmaster could make an absolute killing if they got their they actually got some stock together.
Exactly.
I would buy 2.
What kind of Thrustmaster is it you're trying to buy?
So I think it's called the HOTAS 4, and the reason that specifically the one I want is because it works on PS4 as well as PC. Whereas most of the other ones are PC sticks, and you can get some very, very good PC sticks. So that would be easy. But I love my giant television and playing Star Wars on that. So I do want the stick for the PS4 as well as the PC. And those are I think a lot of people have had exactly the same idea as me. So they're in short supply.
I wonder if Flight Simulator also had a role in that.
Yes.
I hope it's all Squadrons. I hope the Squadrons has done so well that it's tanked the Thrustmaster secondary market. But yeah, it's just nice to be in VR spaceship. Really nice to be in VR spaceship. That genre needs more stuff in it. Any we've said this a million times, but any VR thing where you're in a made up cockpit just feels
works, doesn't it?
Fucking good. Particularly because I use a desktop mic, so I don't have to have a microphone on my headset. There's so much I push my chair back into the middle of the room, the nerdiest thing in the world, and I'm just in an X-wing cockpit then, right? It's just and I'm yelling to my friends, and making call outs and doing cool flips, and then I take the helmet off and I'm just an ordinary human man who lives in Bath. And then I can just put it back on and I'm back. It's good. And then I have dreams all night about about just being in VR, which is not that distinguishable from being in VR. And then you wake up and you feel like you haven't slept, so you play some more Star Wars. It's a good life, is what I'm saying. I'm really ready for 6 more months of lockdown now, is what I'm saying. I just need this game to survive. Otherwise, I don't know what I'm going to do.
Shall we do questions from questions?
Yes, that is the only terms by which I will agree to stop talking about X-Wings. Unless this first question is about X-Wing. It's not. David writes, hi all, a few episodes ago, Tom F. brought up the idea of limiting the length of conversations so that dialogue trees would not simply be clunky lists of topics to be exhausted. I think this is a great idea, and I've been toying around with that idea myself for a conversation engine. While I don't have any data to back it up, it seems like players have a much wider range of conversational moves available to them. NPCs typically can't introduce topics, ask questions, interrupt, or otherwise show agency. Have any games had NPC dialogue that is more than just responses to player choices? How would you feel as a player if NPCs also had agency in conversations? Take care, David.
This is a really good question, and it was really discussion about Paradise Killer that the questioner is referring to. And I, again, you can sort of armchair game design this stuff, but what I would say about the core question that he's asking is that no, I don't want NPCs to have agency, because I'm so used to everything in games being a power trip. I think someone interrupting me I'd be furious. But I don't know what you guys think.
I think it's one of those things that's like a really interesting design problem, because like there are a bunch of reasons why giving the player a lot of control over when and how they receive dialogue like makes sense, not just from a kind of, the player is powerful point of view, but just because like those are sequences that affect the player's ability to do other things, their ability to, choose what parts of the game they're engaging with at a certain time. And I can understand the goal of trying to make a system like this that works. All I can think about is the kind of the vast complexity involved in making it work in a way that doesn't cause bigger problems. I think maybe that'd be the other point. Our current way of doing dialogue, where it's almost always completely player initiated and player steered, means there can be no ambiguity about when it's appropriate for an NPC to speak. The NPC doesn't need to have any sense of social grace because they know they can speak, because the players just pressed A to ask them about, whether they think it's a good idea to reboot the nuclear reactor or whatever the fuck it is. And so you take that away, and you have to then have AI that's smart enough to know when it's a good time to speak. And most people don't have that AI. I certainly don't. So that's a big task, because then there's a question of if there's multiple characters in the scene, who talks and when? And I guess you could simplify this to within a given conversation tree, should AI be able to interrupt you or ask their own questions? But the fact is they do. A conversation tree is by its nature deterministic and player led. So it doesn't matter if you can create the illusion of an interruption, you can create the illusion of a question being asked the other way, but it doesn't change the mechanics of what's actually happening. For this to actually work, it would need to be a kind of an actual AI behavioral system, I think, where they are capable of coming up to you and saying, hey, what do you think about this? And that is going to inevitably lead to some pretty hardcore Bethesda type jank where a character walks up to you in the middle of a... Well, actually, that's a good example. The Bethesda games do have a mechanic for NPC interruptions.
The guards.
It's the thing they do where they send an NPC running at you like an arrow across the battlefield to steal focus from you and go, hello, do you want to join me in my shed? Like a bomb goes off behind them. And that stuff's good for highlight reel YouTube videos, but it doesn't work.
I think the closest we get to this, the most effective version of this is when NPCs just say no to you. I'm thinking particularly of Dragon Age 2 and the romantic advances that you can attempt in that game that are just sort of shut down. And that to me is refreshing. That's a way of kind of doing this within the conventional conversation systems that we're used to.
Yeah. Having writing, there's a difference between giving AI meaningful conversational agency and writing characters that don't always agree with you.
Yeah, for sure.
Or aren't there to be fixed by the player, which I know is a pet peeve of mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, like, to take away some of the player's power in terms of the impact of what they say, but you probably still need to have it be the player who steers the saying of it. Unless it's a game that's 100% built around a conversation system like that.
Yeah, I do like the idea. This is what Tom Francis was talking about, that where he was talking about games where saying the wrong thing just ends a whole track of possible gameplay that could result, which is obviously incredibly hard to design around, because you have to build a million tracks, because you still want the player to reach the end of the thing, right? So you don't want them to sabotage their entire experience for themselves by being rude to every NPC they meet. So that's that's a dilemma I don't think can be quite resolved, even with a magical AI that could talk to you organically like a human.
Yeah, right.
I really like Signs of the Sojourner. Or Sojourner. Yeah. Have either of you played that?
Not played it. I've read about it though. Yeah,
it's a card game, and the conversations are like abstracted, so that you're not making actual dialogue choices. Instead, you're taking it in turns with the NPC you're talking to place down cards to try and match symbols. And if you're able to match symbols with the person that you're talking to create a link of like 6 cards in a row, that is termed as like some sort of an accord or an agreement with this person, and so you get a bit of dialogue which is positive, and they respond well to you, and maybe they give you some information that you want. If you're not able to match symbols with that person, you then get a different branch of dialogue, essentially, where they're pissed off at you, they're less likely to help you, that sort of stuff. And so you feel as a player like you've got agency over the direction of the conversation, but you're not. The possibility space isn't visible in a way that it is with a dialogue tree. So you don't have that sense of necessarily having closed off a route. And so it feels, although it's abstracted, actually much more like real conversation. Because when I'm talking to a person, I don't have like 4 things in my head and like some sense of, which one shall I say? And a visible tree of content disappearing from that person.
Are you saying you don't? You're saying you don't enter every conversation always knowing that one of the bottom option is leave? Like, tell me more.
Goodbye.
I don't want to talk about this, or I have to go.
Tell me about your people and culture. This reminds me of the Oblivion reaction wheel.
Oh God! I love that thing.
I love that thing too. It's the funniest thing in games. It's amazing, especially because the facial animations are so bad in that game, frankly. They sort of contort in strange ways. Is this fear or is he aroused? I can't tell.
I think. I mean, obviously we've talked about it before, but I think the reason I love that thing so much is because now more than ever I understand that these things take time to design, and there will be documentation for that outlines what its purpose is, and I don't think it meets it. Like it is an experience, but I just can't imagine it was the experience anyone intended to make, and that's what kind of makes it magical. I think.
Yeah, I'm glad it happened somehow.
It's not how you simulate what it's like to talk to a person. It's just not. It's just not, because I don't think about telling a joke and stare at your face and see if you smile. Like, that's not how that works. Or I don't think about threatening you and stare at your face to see if you smile about that. Like, that's yeah. But would that it did work that way, honestly. Is that all we've got to say about dialogue systems? I'm trying to think if there is a way of making this NPC interruption work, but maybe I should just interrupt myself and read out a different question.
Phoenix Wright does it quite well,
but
you could just shout, "Objection!"
Yeah, it's like a renegade.
Objection!
Sleep is death, but that's cheating, because the NPC is not an NPC; it's another player that is free to. It's a cheaty answer. Yes. And by cheaty answer, I mean I've run out of things to say about the question. So.
Cool. The next question comes from, I think it's He or Hi, who writes, "Dear Crayfish and Cormorant, watching the latest David Attenborough documentary made me consider the upcoming console releases and their potential impact on the climate, producing waste by obsoleting old technology, and the inevitable cost of worldwide shipping for so many units. Do you think we'll see a change to this attitude in the future, and how do you think it might change? For example, the move to digital only to reduce physical production and shipping emissions, or a change in console design to allow single modules to be upgraded rather than the customer having to buy an entire new console revision to enable improved fidelity. Many thanks for the pods. Best wishes, Hi from the Discord." So I think this is obviously a very a worthwhile question. It's also a very difficult one to answer in isolation because, I think it's useful, I think, to talk about ways in which the games industry specifically can imagine a future for itself, which is greener. However, I suspect that it's more likely that the games industry will find itself changing to adapt to, ideally, different attitudes towards much bigger subjects to do with tech and international industry and all the rest of it, and manufacturing, that affect games, but almost certainly aren't led by games in terms of what needs to happen and when. And that's if those things happen, which is a more pessimistic thought. Does that make sense? I sort of doubt that it would be the games industry deciding, hey, we're not going to ship things quite the way we used to, or we're not going to think of technology the way we used to. It's more likely that society as a whole needs to rethink some of that stuff and then pass those learnings into every form of manufacturing and every form of consumer technology.
Yeah, so at the heart of this is the idea of digital distribution being environmentally healthy. I think that's not an assumption we should make based on the amount of energy and server space that it takes to actually give people those products. And yeah, if there's anything we've learned from e-currency, actually a lot of the power output that's buzzing around on the internet comes from that, and the gaming could become that. So just because you're not shipping physical things doesn't mean you're not burning energy, and you need to ask where that energy is coming from, how it's supplied, and whether it's green or not. And I think it's actually this is a great question because this is actually an underexplored aspect of the gaming industry for sure.
Yeah, it's an important subject. It's just we could talk about how, because even as you say, if we moved to every game being, run on a cloud Stadia style, then even then the power costs are astronomical, environmentally and otherwise.
Yeah, if the computer's not in your house, that computer is still effectively somewhere in the world. Like the parts still need to be made for the server that's running on, and the power consumption still exists and is probably amplified. And Tom, you mentioned earlier, if you did move to a system where consoles were upgradable, say, you've still just got the product distribution problem of things being posted around the world, shipped about.
Yeah, I feel like often, quote unquote, the cloud is often bandied about as a solution to this, but I would challenge that enormously. I think whatever the cloud means for each company is very different, and they can be incredibly power intensive. And it depends where they're based in the world, and also you have to have server centers near. Geography matters for servers. If you want really responsive activity, you need to be nearer to a server than. What I'm saying is all the servers can't be in America. So what do you do then? And how do you actually build those server centers? And what is the environmental impact of that as well? So there's a whole chain of supply that needs to be examined for this matter that I have too little knowledge on to comment on, to be honest. But it's a great question.
Yeah, it's just a big question is the thing, I think. So from that to a question about hugging. Simon writes, "Hi CNC, I was recently playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey and I walked past someone who was crying. I went over to try and console them, but instead they ran away in fear, evidently presuming that the armoured Mystios with the big sword was probably going to attack them. It made me wonder, given that there are so many video games where you can hurt people, are there any where you can comfort people? Given so many names now have a button that will let you pet the dog, 2020 has given me a crazy urge to hug the NPCs I walk past. Keep up the good work and hugs for all that want them, Simon."
I'd love a button to pet the human in every game.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone asks pet dog. No one asks pet man.
Why not pet man?
Yeah, exactly. I think in terms of games where you actually comfort people, Kind Words is the best example of this I can think of. I mean, that's a game about literally offering kind words to other humans, real humans. But given that the vast majority of internet exchanges of language in a kind of anonymous sense are not that is a nice counterpoint. Trying to think of game, and I guess I haven't played it, but I guess, Graham, you mentioned Spiritfarer fits this bill.
Yeah, it's a game entirely about tending to a boat filled with anthropomorphic animals and comforting them, essentially, as you take them towards their final resting place. And like tending to them means hugging them. There's just a button in the UI. You can walk up to any of the characters and give them a hug at any point, and the animation for it is lovely. It also means like building and decorating them a nice house and cooking them their favorite meal, and like gathering items that represent fond memories from their past and all this sort of stuff. It is 100% a game about tending to people and caring for them and comforting them. And it's really lovely.
I literally can't think of any other game that does that, which is perhaps an indictment of the medium as a whole.
I'm trying to think. Yeah, like, I mean, because there are plenty of games where you can, like, I mean, yeah, just being nice, just offering a nice hug if someone feels down. Maybe Fable has some of this, but that's like you can do a fart and make them feel better or something. Like, I'm not sure if it's quite the same thing.
I mean, The Sims has
That's
better
true.
interpersonal relationship stuff, and you can comfort NPCs, or they comfort each other without your interaction as well. It's kind of a big thing.
That's true. It's not quite, yeah.
Football Manager, you can, if a player does particularly poorly on the pitch, you could choose to either scold them or to, tell them that, basically, to tell them to buck up and, tell them, say to the press, in fact, that you support them and that they're a great player and you're sure they'll bounce back. Aww. Sometimes they really appreciate that, and sometimes the rest of the team gets cross at you for not condemning the one that was rubbish. You just destroy your team's morale because it seems like you can't tell the difference between a good player and a bad one.
That's hilarious.
Oh, that is very funny.
Pet the millionaire.
Yeah.
They're not all millionaires.
Our last question for the evening comes from Valike, who writes, Dear greetings CNC crew. Traditionally in video games, losing isn't fun. The only times I actually enjoy losing rather than just tolerating it are multiplayer games where after a closely matched yet friendly contest, my opponent outpredicts me to tip the balance in their favour. But is it possible to experience this when your opponent is a computer? Is it possible to make losing fun? Yours defeatedly, Valike. I think it's kind of interesting because losing to me suggests kind of like competitive loss rather than just failing or dying, right? Because like it feels like we've talked about what makes failing interesting a bunch over the years, and there's plenty of examples of games that we all like where failing is an integral part of it. Dare I say it?
Spelunky.
That was both the low hanging flute and the other low hanging flute of the podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Spelunky and Dark Souls,
tooting both of them at the same time, and like because like those are games where failure is integral, and I would say partly integral to the appeal because if you don't like failing, you're not going to like those games to some extent. But is that what this is talking about? Like, are there examples of games where losing in a competitive setting, losing to the AI is the thing you can derive pleasure from?
I find this in competitive card games and that kind of thing, where I get to look back and analyze why I lost and perhaps learn from it and actually get better at the game. So where in that context, losing is a form of progress, where I've lost because I was inefficient with my mana or whatever, or didn't play this right card at the right time. And it's also that's just an interesting intellectual challenge to analyze your own behavior and your own play in order to better yourself. So that's potentially a good one. Having said that, fuck Hearthstone. Sometimes there's just RNG. Sometimes there's just luck involved in what gets drawn when. And that frustrates me endlessly in these games.
I tend to be okay with losing and dying in almost any game where it's systemic rather than a narrative. Like if I'm playing something like Mafia, for example, which I talked about on the podcast a few weeks ago, and I talked about losing the race in that, and the consequence of that is I just have to now do that race again because that's not how the story goes. I think we talked about Prince of Persia recently, where Sands of Time has the narrator who says, "Oh wait, that's not what happened when you fell on some spikes." That's just what every linear narrative action game feels to me when I die and then have to repeat a bit of it. But if I'm playing something like Crusader Kings, for example, which is a very, like, it's a narrative heavy game, but it's systemically fueled. So if my character dies in that, that just feels like an end to a story which I had enormous agency over, and like the end of an actual story, like a book or a TV show. I'm not like cross about it or anything like that. It just feels like the end of the story, even if I don't have an heir to like assume control of the child. The other time I like it is in like strategy games where you can see, oh, I got outsmarted there. Like there was a clear strategy where you can see the workings of the AI you were playing against, which is sort of the opposite of the Hearthstone RNG thing you were mentioning, Tom, where you feel like, oh, this was totally fair. The example I always think of is Unity of Command. There's a sequel which I haven't played, but the first one, the enemies are really good at applying battlefield tactics in order to lure you into traps, essentially. Like they will leave defenses in their front lines so that you will poke your way through those defenses, and then they will cut off your supply lines behind you, closing the door that you just came through, and that sort of stuff. And when you see them actually doing that, there is such there's a great sense of, oh, the AI I'm playing against feels like intelligent person at that point, which is like, I appreciate loss at that point.
There's a great term which is called fading forwards, and this is a great thing in pen and paper games, but it's also a thing that can happen in RPGs where you mess with a quest but it actually opens up new options and new character developments. Games aren't particularly good at that. Video games aren't, but on the rare occasions where it happens, it's immensely satisfying. So that's another good sort of lost state.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because we've talked about that before in the sense of like what makes you accept a lost state. Because like save scumming is the anti that, right? Like save scumming is saying I didn't like that I lost even a small amount, so I'm going to rewind time and redo it. And that's an interesting kind of quandary. But I think what it comes down to is like if the lost state is interesting, then then it's interesting to persevere necessarily, and that is true of. Like I think maybe what's interesting or engaging about like dare I say a Spelunky death or something like that is that you can look back at it and go like, well, the circumstances by which that came about are interestingly unlikely, or involve systems talking to each other in ways that resulted in a bad thing happening to me, but have taught me something about what this possibility space actually is, and that's satisfying in its own right, even if you can't, keep playing from that point. And I think the same is true of successful kind of fail forward moments, which are about realizing actually, well, we didn't get what we wanted, but this possibility space is bigger than we thought it was. So maybe we do want to go in this direction now. But I agree with you that games aren't necessarily great at doing that at all.
No, like the opposite of that is the forced fail. And I hate this in games where you're thrown into a combat situation or something you have to lose in order to progress. And that just feels really unfair.
Well, I guess what it comes down to is like you have to respect the thing that caused your demise, and if it's a big system that you don't fully understand, that can command some respect. If it's an AI that has been cleverly designed to outplay you based on terms you agreed to, that can command your respect. A game designer telling you that you've lost, nobody respects that. Boo to them. Piss off, game designers is what you would say. And that's not desirable because why would you ever respect somebody who would put a forced fail sequence like that in a game? Obviously,
quite right.
Yeah. On that note, that is all the questions we've got time for. If you would like to send us a question for future episodes of the podcast, you can do so by emailing us at questions@crateandcrowbar.com. You can also tweet us at Crate and Crowbar. We have a Patreon. Thank you very much to our Patreon supporters, whom are nice, good. You can find out more about becoming a nice, good Patreon supporter at patreon.com/Crate and Crowbar. We have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Crate and Crowbar. That's that. There's a Discord. Discord's good, isn't it?
I like the
yes,
Discord.
It's good job. The answer is yes. You can find a link to that on our website, crateandcrowbar.com. It's a link right up there in the title bar. You click it, big magical button comes up. You click that, you're in the Discord now. Congratulations to you. That's that, I think. I've been Chris Thurston.
I've been Graham Smith.
I've been Tom Senior, and look out for the Film and TV Monday or Soon podcast, in which we will talk about Marriage Story, I'm Thinking of Ending Things, Below Deck, and a bunch of vintage, brilliant British television series. It was a really good chat. I'm looking forward to getting it properly edited and out. So you look for that in your feed.
Monday or Soon.
Monday or Soon.
Lovely.
Thanks for listening,
Thanks for
everybody.
listening, everybody.
Objection.
Hey. Look, Graham's got agency. Shit.
Oh no.